Hello. Guys, it is good to see you. Every week we start off and we welcome our campuses. So if you're hanging out with us in Kenosha, hello to you. Racine campus, hello to you. To our many friends in different parts of this country and even in different parts of the world who watch online, we welcome all of you. We have a very special welcome today to our friends at Timberlake Church in the Seattle area who have more campuses than McDonald's restaurants. We welcome you, and the people in the room with me, we welcome all of you. Wow, that was a lot. So after Halloween each year, I love to go onto social media and look at the creative costumes that people have come up with. And so today what I want to do is look at a few of those costumes that I've seen throughout the years. Some of them go back several decades. I don't know most of these people, but I do know they have awesome costumes, right? This first one actually is from a friend of mine whose son dressed like the old man from Up. Isn't that adorable? That's like one of the best costumes ever. Then this next costume is from a family that was obviously doing a lot at the last minute because it's a bag of groceries. Lame. Who wants to walk around like a bag of groceries? How about this next one? This kid, 4 years old, I think. Pennywise. He looks in the mirror and he's creeped out by himself. That is so bad. Another one just as disturbing as these adults in this next one. Yeah, Bert and Ernie, it looks like plastic surgery gone wrong. Who wants that? All right, let's look at this next one, a little awkward. Your parents dress you up like an elephant. And so can you imagine just going through the neighborhood wearing this thing? Absolutely atrocious. But one of my favorite ones, maybe because it has a religious tone to it, is this dad who dressed up in this next photo. The wages of sin is death. I can't imagine anybody more excited to see this guy than his neighbors, right? And I don't know if his daughters are supposed to be Jehovah's Witnesses or if they're supposed to be angels. I don't know. Well, over the past couple of months, I have been thinking a lot about how polarized our world has become and how easy it is to be against something and to be opposed to something and to disagree with something, right? It just seems like everybody does this. And I got to tell you, I do understand this. I really do. I think as humans, there are going to be moments in our life where we're like, I can't put up with that, right? I'm not going to be quiet about this issue. The problem is there's so many different issues that we can oppose and be against that if we're not careful, our whole life is going to be defined by what we are against rather than by what we are for. And so the challenge for us is to say, hey, how can we be known by what we are actually for? How can we get to the place where that is our reputation? And the reason we want for that to be our reputation is this was the reputation of Jesus. When we studied the life of Jesus, it's very obvious that Jesus was for people and Jesus was for the communities that they lived in. Jesus was for people and for the communities they lived in. If we are going to reflect the heart of Jesus for people and for our communities, we have to find a way in the different environments that we're a part of to unite people, to bring hope to people, and to be an agent of healing. And the good news for all of us is that it actually is really not all that complicated. If you want to be for people and for the community in which you live, or the township in which you live, or the village in which you live, all you need to do is make a decision that you're going to be a good neighbor to people and that you're going to live a life of doing acts of kindness for individuals. That's really all it takes. Now, in the first century, the Apostle Paul, he writes a letter to a young pastor named Timothy, and he talks in this letter about how to live a victorious and how to live an undefeated life. He talks about how we can thrive in the midst of difficult circumstances. And one of the things that Paul writes about in this letter is the importance of doing good deeds. Here's what he writes. He says, the good deeds of some people are obvious, and the good deeds done in secret will someday come to light. Now, the context in which he's writing this is he's telling his audience, he's telling his readers, hey, there is value in good deeds. Whether or not you think they're a big deal, whether or not you think they're having a lot of impact, he says, I'm telling you, there is power in doing good things. And so my question to you today is, what good deeds are you doing on a regular basis? to unite people and to bring hope and to bring healing in the different environments that you're a part of. In the most famous talk that Jesus ever gave, here's what Jesus said. He said, "Let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father." Like, don't be afraid of people knowing the good deeds that you do. It ought to be spread everywhere because good deeds are contagious. And even more than that, people recognize the greatness of God when they see you doing something, especially when your motive is, I'm doing this because of my love for God. So growing up in our home, we had a little sign that hung above our kitchen table. I remember this from growing up. It was a sign that said, talk. That was it. Try a little kindness. Try a little kindness. A little kindness makes a big difference. I think the struggle that a lot of us have is if we want to make a big difference, we think, well, we've got to start a nonprofit or we've got to volunteer endless amounts of hours to different organizations or we ought to be one of the big donors to one of the programs that exist in our city to help fight different types of issues. It just gets into our mind that if we're going to really make a big difference, here's what we've got to do. But the truth is, it just starts by little acts of kindness. And it starts by getting along. It starts by working towards unity. There have been two individuals running for governor of Utah. And I don't know the religious background of either of these individuals. I do know that both of these men have very different views on how they want to run the state and what they think is best for the state of Utah. And so in the weeks leading up to the election, they put out a series of ads. Let me show you one of those ads.
I'm Spencer Cox, your Republican candidate for Utah governor.
And I'm Chris Peterson, your Democratic candidate for governor.
We are currently in the final days of campaigning against each other.
But our common values transcend our political differences, and the strength of our nation rests on our ability to see that.
We are both equally dedicated to the American values of democracy, liberty, and justice for all people.
We just have different opinions on how to achieve those ideals.
Although we sit on different sides of the aisle, we are both committed to American civility and a peaceful transition of power.
And we hope Utah will be an example to the nation.
Because that is what our country is built on.
Please stand with us on behalf of our great state and nation.
My name's Spencer Cox.
And I'm Chris Peterson.
And we approve this message.
I love that ad. Kindness is not that difficult. Deciding, hey, we're going to find common ground, not that difficult. And if we really want to be for people and for the communities that we live in, we need to find ways to put aside our differences, be kind to each other, and focus on something bigger than ourselves. So, like many of you, when I was growing up, I was a big fan of magic, right? Because I like to watch something and then try to figure it out, but specifically, I like to watch things that can't be explained by logic. And so I would always be fascinated. Whenever there was a magic show, I'd try to watch very intently. And I loved David Copperfield even at a young age. And then I got into my teenage years and I decided I was going to learn magic, right? And so I would learn card tricks that I could show to people in different settings. I learned some quarter tricks. So whenever I'd be around kids, I would really impress them. I'd like pull out a quarter and I'm like, hey kids, watch this. And I go, whew, whew. Where did it go? And the kids would be like, and I'd be like, whoop, there it is. Right? And here's another one that I used to show kids. I would say, I'd say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rub the quarter through my arm. I dropped it. And then I would be like, let me do it again. And I'm like, I dropped it. And I'd say, let me do it one more time. And I'd be like, there it is. There it is. It's going through my arm. Woo. And then I would press it up. It's in there. It's in there. It's in there. And then there it goes. I'll pick that up later. I was like thinking, I was like impressing people, and I'm sure people are like, you are the biggest dork in the world, right? Well, let me tell you why I bring this up. I bring this up because I know I'm not going to do a magic trick today. I know I'm going to really disappoint you. I bring this up because here's a question I want to ask you. If I could just give you a magic wand, and you could wave this over your town, your village, the specific community, or even maybe the neighborhood that you live in, and wish for anything, what would you wish for? Well, whatever it is that you just wish you could wave this magic wand over and make go away, you and I both know that ain't ever happening. Never gonna happen. Now, there's lots of great programs that exist in our communities to help people, but I think we all know that those programs are really a Band-Aid, right? They help people get through a specific season, and that's important, but they're not a magic wand. That being said, 2,000 years ago, Jesus said something that, quite honestly, if we chose to live it out, would have the ability to not magically erase the problems, but drastically reduce the tensions and the struggles and the issues and the problems that exist in the areas we live. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was approached by a group of religious leaders. They're in a debate over theology. They start firing off a couple questions at him. And one of the questions that he was asked was the question of all the Jewish laws, what is the most important? Now, if you've been a follower of Jesus for any length of time, my guess is you know his response. It's one of the most well-known responses of anything Jesus ever said. Here's what he said. Jesus replied, the most important commandment is this: you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And then he said, the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. What if the solutions to the biggest problems that we face in our neighborhoods and in our towns and in our villages and in our communities and in our cities is not just another program? What if the solution to loneliness, what if the solution to overwhelmed parents, what if the solution for at-risk kids, what if the solution for people having their basic needs met isn't another nonprofit? Now, let me be clear. I absolutely think we need programs and we absolutely need nonprofits in our communities. But if you don't hear anything else I say today, I want you to hear this. Relationships are always more effective than programs. Relationships are always more effective than programs. If every single person who lived in our communities had a growing network of relationships in their life, it would not magically eliminate the problems, but it would drastically reduce the very things we wish we could change in our communities. And so when Jesus was asked to condense the Jewish law to what is the most important command, he said, love God with everything you have. And then he kind of elevated to the same level. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. Now think about this. It's easy to understand why he said, love God with everything you have. That's a religious answer. If God is indeed the creator of all things, and God is perfect, and God is holy, and there's no flaw in the character of God, then yes, love God with everything you have. But along the same lines, he said, just equally important, love your neighbor as yourself. Why would Jesus say that? Well, John, who was one of the disciples of Jesus, he actually explains why in a letter he writes in the first century. He says, if we don't love people we can see, how can we love God whom we cannot see? And so Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. This is a big deal. In fact, there's another instance in the book of Luke where Jesus is having a conversation with a young lawyer. And once again, he boils the Jewish law down to two things. He says, love God with everything you have and love your neighbor as yourself. And after saying those two things, we read this. Jesus told him, do this and you will live. Do this, love God with everything you have, love your neighbor as yourself, and you will experience a meaningful and a purpose-filled life. And then here's how this man that Jesus is talking to responds. The man wanted to justify his actions. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? You gotta love this. The very first thing this guy does is he tries to kind of find a loophole, and so he says, well, who's my neighbor? He just wants to be able to justify in his mind, well, I'm doing this, and I'm okay at this, and I don't have a problem with this. And then to answer the question, Jesus tells a story, and it's one of the most famous stories in all of the Bible. If you are not a follower of Jesus, it is possible you've heard this story. Jesus talks about a Jewish man who makes his way from Jerusalem to Jericho, and on his way of making this journey and this trip, he's on a road, and he gets surrounded by a group of thugs. They beat him up, they take his money, they rob him, and they leave him for dead. And the very first two people to pass by and see him are religious leaders. And so they look at him, and some theologians believe they actually had to step over his body to keep on their path because of how narrow the road was. But regardless, they see him, they step over him, and they keep on going. They were busy, they had their schedule to keep. Some would argue that according to their religious laws, they couldn't get blood on them. Otherwise, they would have to go into some quarantine for a while and go through some cleansing rituals. So they were just going to interrupt their schedule for too long. They'd have to go back to Jerusalem. I mean, just some crazy things. But regardless, they did not stop. And then the very next guy that comes along in this story is a Samaritan. And we read the Samaritan helps this guy. And he gets him he finds the resources he needs, and he shows mercy, and he shows compassion, and he shows love to this individual. Now, in the first century, Samaritans were despised by Jews. They were half-breeds. They weren't fully Jewish. And so for those listening to Jesus tell the story, there's a lot of angst. It's like if Jesus was telling you and I the story, and he says a terrorist comes by and helps the guy and shows mercy and love and compassion. We're like, do not make the terrorist the hero of the story, right? But Jesus makes the Samaritan the hero. And because he wants to make a point, he decides to ask the man a question. Here's what we read next. Now, which of these three individuals would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes. Now go and do the same. You go and show this kind of love to people. And because this is such a famous story, we read this and then we move on and we get about our life. And we do some mental gymnastics and we connect some dots really quickly and we say, well, yeah, if I was in a situation, a life and death situation, and someone needed my help and I could do something about it, I would be the Good Samaritan. And guess what? You would. And so would I. I mean, if I have the ability to help someone in a life or death situation, I am going to step in and do it. The problem is, it's easy to justify ourselves when we read the story and to say, well, I would do that, because the reality is that's going to happen maybe once in our entire life. Maybe once in our time, twice if it's just crazy that we're going to be in a situation where we can truly provide the help to someone who is in a desperate situation. And so what we do is we just take this word neighbor and we turn it into a metaphor, and we just say, well, the whole world's my neighbor, and if I'm ever in a situation, there's no doubt that I would step in and help. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of thinking. But the challenge is, and the problem is, when everybody is our neighbor, nobody is our neighbor. Let me say that again. When everybody is our neighbor, nobody is our neighbor. Think about this. And if we just convince ourselves, well, everybody's my neighbor and I just love everybody, well, yeah, in a general sense, I suppose that's true. I'm willing to help anybody. In a general sense, yes, that's true. And so in addition to thinking of our neighbors metaphorically as the whole world, one of the most powerful things we can do to help our communities is to think of our neighbors in a very literal way. Real people, real names, real phone numbers, and real addresses. And to help you understand kind of where I'm going with this and to kind of help make a point here, I don't want to shame anybody, but I want to walk you through an exercise here, right? I want you to imagine a tic-tac-toe board. Okay, something as simple as this. If you're watching online and you have a piece of paper that you can just grab real quick and you want to draw a board out, that's great. Just go ahead. But I want you to imagine a tic-tac-toe board. And in the middle of this tic-tac-toe board, I want tic-tac-toe, I'm going to get into, right? I want you to put a house, and that's your house. You might even put your address, all right? And so I want you to think of this as your neighborhood. You've got your house in the middle, and now I want you, however your neighborhood is set up, if you're in an apartment, if you're in a condo, maybe you live in a rural setting. I know that this can be really challenging, but I want you to imagine your 8 closest neighbors, all right? And so, again, you might live on a 5-acre parcel, right? So this is going to be a little bit more challenging, or in an apartment building. But I want you to think of your 8 closest neighbors. And as you do, I want you to not just think of what their house looks like. I want you to ask yourself, do you know the names of the adults in those households? Now, I was asking myself this question this past week, and I know the names of the adults in 3 of the households. I recognize some of the faces in some of the other households, but literally in my setting, and I'm an extrovert, I love to know my neighbors, but in 3 of the households, I'm talking the 8 closest neighbors to me, do I actually know their names? And if you're like, yeah, I mean, I call everybody bro. That doesn't count, all right? What's up, girl? Yeah, that does not count, right? What are their actual names? Now, if you say, well, I know their names, you're gonna be doing better than most people, but how well do you know them? Because there are different levels to knowing somebody. I think we realize this, right? Level 1 in a relationship is you know their face. Oh, if I see them at a grocery store, I'll be like, hi, I think they live next door to me. Right? That's a level of relationship. And along with face, maybe you know their name. That's like the first basic level. Then there's the next level, which you know facts about them. I know their kids' names. I know where they grew up. I know what school they went to, just from very basic facts. Then there's a third level of relationship where you know their feelings. Their feelings about politics, their feelings about like where the best vacation spots are, their feelings about the school systems in the area they live, right? The feelings, like you've had enough conversation with them to know a little bit of their opinions about life. You know what teams they're excited about because they have jerseys. Then there's a 4th level, and this is where you start getting really intense. You know their fears. They've been vulnerable. They've been open. They've shared some things with you. You know some of the things that they struggle with, maybe some of their concerns or challenges. And then there's a 5th level of relationship, and this is like one of the highest levels, and that's where you know their faith. You know where they stand with God, and they might be anti-God, but you know you've had honest conversations about faith and about some of their religious beliefs. I was reading a book recently that was talking about the different levels of friendship, and specifically in the context of our 8 closest neighbors. And let's bring those back up here for a second. About the 8 closest neighbors, and they said that less than 10%, that doesn't really shock us, less than 10% of people, when it comes to their 8 closest neighbors, are even at a level 1 or 2 relationship with all 8 of them. They might know 1 or 2 of them, but level 1 or 2 with 8 of them. And then they said, when it comes to levels 3, 4, and 5, that only 1% of Americans know their 8 closest neighbors at that level. And so Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And it's so easy to do when you're thinking of it in metaphoric terms. But how well do you do at loving your actual neighbors, the people who live around you? Now, I'm not a poet. I'm not like some lyricist. I am not like this expert at love, but I think I can say this with confidence. In order to love someone, it's helpful to know their first name. Wouldn't you think so? I mean, if you've been on 16 dates and you still don't know the first name of the person you're going to say, I love you to, it's helpful to know someone's first name. And so if you don't know the names of your 8 closest neighbors, my encouragement to you is get out a piece of paper and draw a tic-tac-toe board, put your house in the middle, and then just decide, I'm going to put this on my fridge, or I'm going to put this somewhere I see it, and I'm just going to start writing down names when I meet people. All right, Tom and Mandy. All right, I met Tom and Mandy. All right, we got Larry and Paula. I met them. Okay, that's great. I got my friends Han and Marla. Okay, I'm getting to know them. Right, and you just start filling it in slowly but surely. And then one day you're going to say, I win. I know all 8 of them. Because here's the deal, guys. Neighbors are what make up neighborhoods. And they make neighborhoods good or bad or great. And neighborhoods make up small communities. And small communities are what make up cities. And if we ever really want to love our city and be for our city, it starts by loving our neighbors. And it's not going to shock you because there's been so many studies done on this. But people who have close bonds with their neighbors actually live longer. And when people know the names of their neighbors, crime in those neighborhoods are down 60%. When natural disasters strike, your neighbors are going to be the first responders. This is worth committing to. And I know, depending on your personality, it can be a little intimidating, be a little scary. I'm just not into, getting to know people. I don't like people getting into my life. I get it, right? I'm actually an extrovert, and I know it can be intimidating. In fact, a couple years ago, I'm mowing my lawn, and we had some new neighbors move in right next door, and I saw them outside for the first time, and I'm like, do I stop the lawnmower and go over there, and I'm sweating, and I just kind of like justify to myself, this isn't the moment, right? So I just keep mowing the lawn, and then I put everything away, and they're still outside. And then I was like, now I'm gonna look rude if I go inside, and so I was like, what's up? And then they started walking towards me. And then guess what? I started walking towards them. And it was like a movie, man. Our arms went out. And it was like we embraced. It was great. No, we kind of got together. And I'm like, hey, who are you guys? And like, we're John and Marcy. And I'm like, Dave, my wife, Rindy, she's not here right now. And we got talking. And then you know what I did? I went inside after I was done talking. It was just a short conversation. And I took out my cell phone. And I wrote down their names. And the next time I saw them hanging outside, I had forgotten their names. So I pull it up. And I say, hey, John and Marcy, what's up? And all of a sudden, they're like, man, this guy knows our name. They're like, we're embarrassed. We forgot your name. I'm like, don't worry. People do that. I'm Dave, But I had their names written down. It was a big deal. And then over time, we just become closer. We've had more conversations. And we become so close that we actually watch the debates together. Woo! But we hang out all the time. They're great, great friends. Now, there are other neighbors where I know their names. And I'm going to tell you, we're never going to be best friends. And that's okay. I just want to do my best to be a good neighbor because when our communities, our communities are way better off when we have great neighborhoods. And to have great neighborhoods, we actually got to know our neighbors. And when you get to know your neighbors, here's what I'm going to tell you. Very rarely when you get to know somebody more, do you actually like them less. Now, I know you're going to talk about your ex-husband where that was the case, okay? That's fine, right? More I got to know him, woo! But for the most part, the more we get to know somebody, the more we love them, or at least understand them, or see where they're coming from. And so it's important for us to get to know our neighbors if we're going to truly begin to see our communities impacted. And as important as this is, I know there's two really big hurdles we all have to get over. Number one is, the number one barrier is the time barrier. Everybody's busy. And so what ends up happening is we justify ourselves, right? And we say things like, well, this is just a season. And things will settle down someday. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but someday is the most dangerous word in our vocabulary. Because someday has no end. Someday has no finish line. The truth is, things will settle down when we die or we get intentional about adjusting our schedule. And so if you want to learn to love your actual neighbors, I'm telling you, it will not happen accidentally. You have to create margin in your schedule for it to happen. And then another way we justify ourselves is we say, well, this is just the way life is. Everybody's busy. And the truth is, there are a lot of people that are busy. But there are also plenty of healthy people in our world who have chosen to live life at an unhurried pace. And so when we read the different scriptures about Jesus, I want you to notice that not a single author ever refers to Jesus or describes him by using the word hurried or rushed. Jesus lived a very healthy life, but he was never hurried or rushed. And his desire is that you and I do not live hurried lives. In fact, when talking about his followers, one of the things Jesus said was that my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. But we will miss out on that deep and meaningful and rich in purpose and satisfying life if we're constantly living life at a frenzied pace. And so Jesus lived a meaningful life because he put margin in his schedule. He was able to engage with people and listen to people. He was able to have deep conversations with people from time to time. And he was interruptible because he had margin. And so when it comes to time, we have to be intentional about creating margin. The second barrier that we have got to get over is the fear barrier. It's almost always intimidating to meet someone for the first time. It feels awkward. We care about what people know about us. But I'm telling you, if all you know is somebody's face or a few facts about them, it's always going to be a shallow relationship. And to love my actual neighbors means I have to get to know them. And my encouragement to you is just take baby steps. So when I moved into the neighborhood that I lived in 2011, I just decided I'm going to go to every party I'm invited to. I've been invited to one so far. No, I've been invited to plenty, right? I decide I'm gonna go to every graduation party that I'm invited to. I'm gonna do everything I can to just get involved in my neighborhood. And as a result, I've gotten to know a lot of neighbors. And to be fair, I am an extrovert. I will acknowledge that. One of my neighbors, Sue, she actually attends Great Lakes Church. And she's like the queen of the neighborhood. She's made it really easy because she has this way of bringing everybody together, and she hosts a bunch of parties, and she has a swimming pool. So like, everybody wants to be Sue's friend, and the whole works. But she is like the hostess with the mostess, right? She's able to get everybody together. And the reason I bring up Sue is because I want you to hear this. You don't have to be Sue. You just have to be yourself. You don't have to be the person who hosts every single party. You just have to be yourself and be intentional about connecting with neighbors. So I'm going to read it again. The good deeds of some people are obvious, and the good deeds done in secret will someday come to light. You have no idea what one conversation or one invitation or one kind note to one of your neighbors has the potential to do. Now, I think part of the reason that I become friends with so many of my neighbors is I've never had a hidden motive. It's not like I'm gonna go there and hopefully I have the opportunity to invite them to be a part of the church I pastor. And then they show up and they surrender their life to Jesus, and then they get water baptized. And then I get to ask them to volunteer and to give, and it's just gonna be great. Never had a hidden motive. I just wanna be a friend. That being said, last time I counted, there were more than 20 of my neighbors in just my direct neighborhood that actually go to the church. They take, now they don't attend as frequently as I'd like them to. But here's the deal, guys. As humans, we are better together. And the better our neighborhoods are, the better our communities are. A few years ago, there was a world-famous composer, Eric Whitacre, who decided to conduct a fun little experiment. And basically what he does, he writes a song, he posts the sheet music onto his blog, and then he invites people all around the world to sing harmonies of his song. And they were supposed to record themselves and upload to YouTube, and sure enough, that's what they did. And then he hired somebody to take all of these different videos and he put the master track behind them and just flawlessly sync them together. Well, the first video he does is 185 people from 12 countries. It was such a success, 1 million views, that next year he does it again. This time, 2,000 people sang in his virtual choir. Again, produced a masterpiece. Well, this past year he did it again. It's like his 6th time doing it. The choir had more than 17,000 voices from 129 different countries singing. And it's amazing. Because when one unknown person sings, the results can be underwhelming, right? Just one voice, one song, one location, one audience. But when many people come together and sing, the results can be amazing. And this is what a good neighborhood looks like. It starts with just one person saying, I'm going to be a good neighbor, and I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to wave, and I'm going to get to know a name, and I'm going to initiate a friendship. And then maybe perhaps another neighbor starts to join you. And now you got 2 neighbors who are caring about the neighborhood. And then there's a 3rd neighbor. If we want to be for people and for our communities, it starts with being for our neighbors. Now in this season, we have to be really sensitive because of COVID. But we start by getting to know their names. And then maybe we have an opportunity to invite them over to an event, maybe during the holidays. And we're all masked up. We don't even recognize them when they show up. All we see is their eyes, but that's okay, right? Or maybe we join a book club. Or maybe it's making a gift basket for a new family in the neighborhood. Or maybe you order a meal for someone going through a difficult time, or you make a meal. But individual voices become a choir, and our neighborhoods can be known for singing together, for doing life together, and that is how cities get better. So last week, my next door neighbor says to me as we're hanging out, he says, hey, we have a new neighbor moved in on the corner. And I said, I really hope they're not a Chicago Bears fan. And he laughed and said they are. And he said, but I think we need to invite him to hang out with us. And I said, let's do it. And so in the coming weeks, we're going to make it a priority to invite him to hang out with us. A couple thousand years ago, the Apostle Paul is in Athens, Greece, and he's surrounded by a crowd. And he's talking about God. And here's what Paul says. He says, from one man, God made every nation, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that people would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. Translation: you have been placed in your neighborhood and in your residence for a very, very specific reason. You do not live in your neighborhood for the reason you think you do. It's not the school district, and it's not because it has 3 bedrooms. It's not because of the square footage. It's not because it's on a really big lot. You live in your neighborhood because God, before the beginning of time, decided that's where you were going to be. And if you let that sink in, it will change the way you drive into your neighborhood and drive out of your neighborhood. It will change the way you interact with people who don't follow homeowner association rules. It will change the way you think about the people that you barely know, but you've already created different stereotypes about. It doesn't mean you have to be best friends with everyone, but it does mean you can add value to their life in a positive way. And so the problems that we just wish we could, that's part of the trick. But the problems that we just think, well, we could just magically make them go away, right? Now you see how these things work. But that we could just magically make them go away. It's not just another program. It's about relationships. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love for us. Help us to learn how to love you more and to love our neighbors more. Give us the wisdom now to know what to do and the courage to do it. In Jesus' name, amen.